Kalispera. Hello, everyone. At this panel, the Net Zero Commitments and Reality, I'm Christina Deligianni, the Director for Programs and Policy at the Institute for Sustainable Development at EPLO. We have with us today esteemed speakers, Mr. Yannis Daskalakis, Managing Partner of the Daskalakis Group and member of the RISCS Greek Sustainability Group, Matthew Black, Climate Action Manager of the World Green Building Council, and Mr. Nikolopoulos, board member of ASHRAE Hellenic chapter. Thank you so much for being with us today. So we will be talking about net zero, and there's a global push towards sustainability that has been intensifying, and net zero commitments have become a central focus, especially in the real estate sector. These commitments are crucial for reducing carbon emissions, very important for construction, aligning with global climate goals, with COP29 coming up next month in Baku, Azerbaijan, and ensuring long-term economic resilience. However, bridging the gap between these ambitious policies and on-the-ground realities, especially when we talk about different geographies and jurisdictions, remains a big challenge. This panel aims to explore the complexities of achieving net zero in the real estate economy, while discussing the policy frameworks, the technological innovations, and the practical strategies so that we can have a sustainable future. So my first question is to you, Mr. Daskalakis. So there have been many changes when it comes to the regulations and the regulatory framework in the EU market. There is a new EU directive, the Energy Performance of Building Directives. Can you share with us a short roundup of these changes that are upcoming?
Okay, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here at first. And I would like, before answering the question, I would like to just mention that I'm here with the hat of the member of Sustainability Working Group of RISCS Greece, as a, let's say, kind of substitute of Ms. Christina Petropoulou, our chair, which unfortunately was diagnosed with COVID and could not be present today.
And we wish her a speedy recovery.
Yeah, exactly. So I would like to approach this answer through the following roads. It's a matter of what, why, and how. What are we going to do? What EU wants to do to achieve? Why are we targeting the building environment right now? And given the fact that we are targeting the building environment, how we're going to do this? Actually, on what it's kind of easy. EU has set a bold statement, bold target, if you want, to be climate neutral until 2050, and to reduce on 55% these emissions by 2030. These are the goals. These are the main goals. Why we are targeting the building environment? Because, as some of us know, the building sector consumes 40% of the energy consumption in the world, and represents the almost 37, if I'm not mistaken, % of the CO2 emissions globally. Mm-hmm. So we have to do something on that. And now we're going on how. Let's take it in two buckets. What we are doing with the new buildings and the new developments, and what we are doing with the existing stock, which in my opinion is the most important one, because we are Europe. We have all building stock. For the new developments, we say EU has set the following standard. All new buildings must be zero-emission buildings until 2030, which actually means all new buildings until 2030 must consume less than they produce. It's simple. I don't know if it's easy to be achieved, but this is the target. For the existing stock, which is actually the main problem, because 85% of the buildings that we see today will be there in 2050, so we have to do something about that. EU has requested all the member states to submit a plan, a renovation plan, if you want, how they will upgrade the stock with targets of 16% until 2030, 16% of energy efficiency reduction, energy performance in the buildings and until 2030, and 20 to 22% reduction in energy consumption until 2035. And of course, where we are targeting to the worst operating buildings, to the worst efficiency buildings. And for the non-resi buildings, actually the commercial ones, what we are doing, we say that we need the 16% of the worst performing buildings to be renovated until 2030. Wait a minute, 26% until 2035. This is my notes. These are the targets. It's actually bold.
Very ambitious, for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if it can be done in Greece, but let's, for example, in Greece right now we have a new law for the Golden Visa program, which actually targets the old buildings to be renovated in new resi.
Retrofitting them.
Could be part of this program, for example. Finally, another thing that we are doing right now in Europe is we are unifying all the EPCs, or we're trying to do so, in order to speak in the same language, apples to apples, with categories from A to Z, as we all know, and A will be zero-emission buildings, and Z the worst-performing buildings.
And Matthew, building on what we just heard, what about the global perspective? We know what is happening in the European Union, a tsunami of directives that are very much aligned to the EU Green Deal and the climate neutrality targets. But what about the global perspective, and what about the work that you have been doing at the World Green Building Council?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Christina, and thank you for having me today. I think that was an excellent summary, Yannis, of what's happening at Europe and how Europe is being a leader in the built environment space. But as you said, taking it back a step or up a step at a global level, I think broadly we've seen a massive increase in interest around sustainability for the built environment, as people are beginning to recognize now that it's not just a challenge, but it's an opportunity, a really big opportunity to sort out that 40% of emissions and then the other statistic and the other statistic. But at a global level, we had COP28 last year in Dubai. We had some really important announcements come out of that COP, mainly a commitment, not a guarantee, but a commitment to tripling of renewable energy across the globe, and importantly, doubling energy efficiency. And that's really specific to everyone in this room, everyone involved in the built environment. A step on from that, we had another conference, because we all love a conference, at Paris earlier this year, where there was a further announcement and confirmation of the Buildings Breakthrough. So the Buildings Breakthrough is an offshoot initiative of the UN Race to Zero, which many of you may be familiar with, but obviously it's explicitly about how stakeholders and actors within the built environment value chain are going to accelerate the action that we need to see in order to achieve our shared goals. And the language that they've used for the Buildings Breakthrough is that they want to see near zero emission and resilient buildings, the new normal by 2030. So again, it's not as much leadership as Europe is showing in terms of, delivering these quite explicit and clear directives that member states will have to then implement at a national level. But I think broadly what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there is a shift and there is a focus on, as I said, hopefully the opportunity that the built environment is showing at that global level. And I think that's reflected, we've heard colleagues from different sessions today talk about other frameworks, CSRD, TCFD. All of these things are starting to permeate through, and I'm sure all of you in the room are starting to feel the effects of them here and there. Whatever business you're a part of, they will start to affect all stakeholders in the built environment. And I think, when we're talking about net zero commitments and the frameworks that are illustrating this, it's to say that, this is coming, whether it's mandatory from the EU and that kind of leadership, or whether there are voluntary initiatives that are out there. For example, World Green Building Council, we run something called the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, where we try and encourage stakeholders to take action sort of now, further and faster than these statutory frameworks that might be coming further down the line, or you might be familiar with science-based targets. All of these things are out there to try and encourage action and give people a framework within which that they can show that they're taking that action.
Thank you for bringing up these two elements, the policy-making element, and we at the Institute for Sustainable Development look into climate-related policies such as the CSRD and all the ESG-related and climate-related policies and frameworks that are coming, and there's a frenzy at this moment in the Greek market on that. But there's also what you actually said about the great interest from citizens in sustainability and green buildings, which is partly a behavioral change and mentality change when it comes to us as citizens, as individuals looking into our everyday lives within the built environment. And in this context, my question to you, Nikolas, is what role do emerging technologies, innovations, energy efficient building materials, smart building systems, what role do they play when it comes to accelerating this transition to net zero?
They play a very crucial role. Hello to everyone. I'm very glad to be here along to this interesting panel with my fellow colleagues here. I actually am glad to represent ASHRAE Hellenic chapter, and I would like to make a short introduction of what is about ASHRAE in order for everyone to get to know. And ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers. It started and founded more than over 100 years ago. So it's a long non-profit technical society with more than 60,000 members along the world. The abbreviation stands for America, but on US and the United States, but it's a global organization, an international organization. And this is shown by it has chapters in 130 countries, so around all the countries. And our Hellenic chapter is one of the most powerful chapter, maybe in the whole ASHRAE society. We have a lot of representatives in the annual meetings and all this stuff. So I conclude to that. How ASHRAE is involved with decarbonization. Actually, it has started with HVAC design at the beginning, but now it has turned a lot of its standards to sustainability and decarbonizations. Actually, ASHRAE is, let's say, standards machine, or it produces technical standards, which are then applied to local legislation, or they help to set these limits. Let's say the government say, or the European Union, okay, in 2030 we have set these goals for emissions. But why this is 2030 and not 2025, let's say? The point is that these technologies has not been yet developed, and this is where ASHRAE comes from, and this is how crucial it is to develop more technologies in order, because we have identified the problem, which is environmental health and greenhouse gases, which comes to net zero. And it's a nice point here to clarify between the terms, because some people might misunderstand the term net zero and confuse it with energy efficiency, which is not the point. Net zero is a term that has to do with greenhouse gas emission, mostly carbon dioxide, and it's a balance. That's why it uses this net between how much we produce carbon dioxide and how much we remove. So this has to be zero. So it has to be in balance. So here comes the term decarbonization. I don't know, I'm in time?
You are in time, yes, but tell us a little bit about technologies. Have you identified any technologies that could be used in the real estate towards achieving
most technologies are currently directly related to energy efficiency, because it's where it comes. But I wanted just to clarify that it's not just energy efficiency. You can also have planted roofs and all this stuff, but this is not technologies. Most of the technologies are well known already. Like the first one is to insulate the building. If you insulate the building, this is the cheapest and most efficiency, because you reduce the amount of thermal power that you need to achieve the thermal comfort inside the building. So that's the first thing. But this comes with a ventilation demand, which is highly now applied to all the buildings. So another measure that is now applying and is investigating is the demand control ventilation. So the need of, if we insulate the building, which is the first measure to take for energy efficiency and reducing carbon dioxide, then we don't have infiltration, so we lack of ventilation and fresh air demands. So then we design our buildings in order to supply with mechanical systems, fresh air, and condition this air. But after that, we see that we spend a lot of energy on that, and we don't always need this amount of fresh air. Let's say now this hall is half full. It doesn't have the same demand as yesterday morning, which was full. So we can adjust, which is called demand control ventilation, and we can adjust the amount of fresh air, and that's reduced. I'm closing it.
But there are other technologies, like I'm the proud owner of a company that does, a small one, a startup that does green roofs and green walls. And these are technologies and innovations that unfortunately in Greece are not as much developed or mainstream as it should be, because they do provide a kind of insulation for buildings, and they also contribute to net zero. And back to you, Mr. Daskalakis, there are many challenges, especially in the Greek market, when it comes to real estate developers, when they have to align with net zero policies, when they have to align with local regulations. How can we overcome these challenges, especially in the Greek market? I mean, I'm just venting here my disappointment that green roofs and green walls are not really, uptaken in the Greek market, but there are other technologies and other, other challenges that have to be faced.
We are working with a lot of developers, so we can take the discussion with that kind of hat. A developer is someone who wants to have profits. So at the end of the day, they are concerned about higher costs when we are discussing about new demands, higher material costs, higher professional fees, higher, if you are going to go for a certification like BREEAM or LEED, certification costs, etc., etc., etc. So how can we tackle all these things? It's just how will proceed the market. Does the market pay them at first? Right. Okay, we have something that we have to do. We have to go. EU goes and says, you have to do this. And we all know that we have to do this. We have to follow. We have to save the planet, let's say, if it's us to save it. But at the end of the day, we have to have profits, or else we don't exist. So at first, when we started discussing about sustainability, net zero, etc., we started examining if we will have higher rents, higher rental values, higher sales values per square meter. Is that prerequisite? No, we have to see it. So also, we have to see the developers with three different buckets as well. There are developers who are building to sell, there are developers who are building to hold and operate, and there are simple families, let's say, who develop their own homes, at least in Greece, who wants a roof in their head and be there. For them, let's say, it's even more difficult, if they don't have smart financing or green financing to be able to tackle this extra cost. They cannot do this anymore.
Right.
So for everyone, financing is a matter of, it's a very important matter. On the other hand, we can have tax incentives. We can have for the developers, let's say, who hold the building, they have less operating costs. It's cash flow question. For the developers who buy, develop, and sell, it's a matter of sellable per square meter, unfortunately. And it's about their branding, and if the final client, the buyer, will buy in higher value per square meter, because if they don't, so we have the market. We have to train the market. We have to train the market that it is good for them. If it is, we don't say lies, but we can train the market that it's good for them for their operating costs in the future. It's cash flow for them to buy a bit higher in order to support this kind of constructions and be able to support this kind of materials that are good for the planet. It's a matter of financing. And financing from private institutions or the EU itself, programs like RRF, and it's a matter of the final occupier, how they operate.
So you mentioned mentality change, tax incentives, financing, green financing, but Matthew...
I didn't say, I'm sorry, I didn't say about bonuses in square meters for the buildable area, because everyone involved in the market right now knows what I'm saying and why I don't say that.
I see people smiling, so... So, Matthew, back to you. So how can all this, what we just heard, how can the real estate industry balance all the costs of implementing net zero strategies with the long-term benefits for communities and the environment? And let's focus a little bit on communities, because we talk about, costs, economic benefits, performances, but what about communities and the social impact?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. There's a bottom line. People have to make money. The companies have to exist. But there's definitely a bit of a shift that needs to happen. What cost are we thinking about here? Are we thinking of a purely financial cost? Are we considering the carbon cost of the decisions we're making? And really starting to shift all of our decision-making in relation to not only building decarbonization, but every aspect of real estate or built environment aspects into a holistic viewpoint. When we're thinking about this, people often complain about sustainability being a burden, or increasing the costs, or increasing the red tape, or things they have to jump through to achieve that. But ultimately, and someone else mentioned this earlier, we all have to live in a house. We all have to go to work in a building. And ultimately, we want them to be nice places to live, to work, to play. And that's really what I think sustainability should be about. Yes, it's about decarbonization, reducing emissions, and hoping that we can reduce climate change and ultimately reverse it. But it's also about creating sustainable places where we can eat, sleep, work, and play. And I think that's the really important part. And World GBC, along with our Green Building Council network, did some work on this a couple of years ago. And we did a report called Beyond the Business Case. Now, I know the business case is important, but I could reel off 100 different research papers that say that you should be able to get higher returns, higher rents, selling, etc. And also, you just have to consider the fact about transition risk. If you're not doing this, there will come a point where all of these regulatory frameworks come back to bite you, and your asset will be stranded.
Investors will also come back.
Exactly. But thinking about this, beyond the business case, beyond just the financial cost, what can all of these things do to improve our lives? And that's it. It's really about the social benefits that sustainability can bring in your building, the health and well-being benefits, not only for our physical health, but our mental health. What else shall I reel off? Sort of nature and biodiversity increase. We're all aware that, living in a city brings a lot of benefits, but it would be really good if we could start to bring some of that nature back in as well.
Okay, can I?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, go for it.
It actually, when you create places that you live or work better, it is a business case.
Yeah, that's the point.
It is reflected in values, so it's a good scenario.
Of course, especially when we start talking about, climate change, adaptation, when we talk about biodiversity, exactly. And
I was going to say, I will add that, coming back to it's not just about the business case. There's obviously a lot of work now that World GBC and our Green Building Council and a lot of other organizations are involved in about trying to quantify that, about trying to quantify social value or give a value to it, which doesn't just defeat the point, but we do have to do it to some degree in order to help with reporting and also making people more engaged with that in terms of delivery.
Sure. And as we're running out of time, Nikola, last question. Any best practices that you can share from global leaders in net zero real estate development?
Global practices?
Yes.
I was thinking about legislation, because it's the crucial gear for coming this net zero commitment to reality. Because legislation is, okay, we have identified the problem, we know how to do it, we have all the standards, and now what? No one is going to do it because everyone is paying attention to the money part. So the legislation has to be updated to a point that force and motivates the real estate professional to be aware of the environmental health, not only the economic impact. So I have to say that, let's say, a good example is like the LEED certification. Mm-hmm. The LEED certification is not an obligation. It's not
mandatory.
A mandatory
not mandatory
regulation.
yet.
Exactly,
yes.
Exactly. But a lot of real estate companies pursue this this certification. This certification is now based on ASHRAE standard, which are like in 2010. They were developed in 2010, and there are more updated standards that are like 2022, let's say. But these are not applied in the local legislation. So I think all the people on the real estate sector have to be aware of the most updated standards and not focus on the mandatory requirements, because the life cycle of a building is smaller than how challenges, how do I say it, how closely we have to face the challenges. It has to be a reality.
Right.
So we have to be up-to-date and not wait with this inertia of the legislation to be formed.
So being proactive when it comes to voluntary keeping up with legislation would be a way forward in order to showcase a good practice. LEED certification would be one of that, and also it's also what the market needs as well, because you do have certifications that are not mandatory yet, but the market recognizes that. And with that, I would like to thank the panel speakers today for this engaging discussion, and I would also like to thank the audience. It was after lunch, but you're still here, so thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.